Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Today's guest, I'm excited to bring to you. I found her in Fast Company. If somebody actually forwarded me an article that she had written for Fast Company on navigating network events when a person doesn't drink, how to do that. Her name is Haley Moss, and she is a lawyer, a neurodiversity expert, and the author of 4 books that guide neurodivergent individuals through professional and personal challenges. She's consultant to corporations and nonprofits all over the country that seek guidance in creating a workplace that's inclusive. She's a sought-after commentator on civil rights issues, and she's the first openly autistic lawyer in Florida. And so I'm going to bring her on here now, and we're going to talk about neurodiversity and what that means and how it impacts food and beverage functions. Hi, Haley.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. The fact that I reached out to you from that Fast Company article, and this happened just in the last couple of weeks, I'm so excited.
Me too. And honestly, I'm still shocked of how many people really resonated with that piece, because I thought at first of that people are going to just think I'm a stick in the mud who doesn't drink alcohol at networking events. And of course, coming from legal, where it's a very kind of drinking heavy culture, they're going to think I'm just being this very preachy, don't drink type. And that was the opposite of what happened, because I think of why don't people drink at events other than they don't want to, which right. There's all sorts of reasoning behind that, including for me. So it's weird because you think that people are going to act one way and they are so much more gracious than you expect.
Well, and that's good that you're finding that graciousness. But in your article, you also mentioned, you're like, well, why don't you drink? And I don't drink because I just choose not to. And people are like, well, why don't you drink? Come on, let's have a drink. So It gets a little frustrating sometimes.
It really does. And I think for me, the reason I also have that pressure is because there's kind of this, I guess, stereotype, especially with younger generations. So with millennials and Gen Z who are newly 21, recently 21, or still in their 20s, that you're still in this party phase and that you're going to want free alcohol because it's available to you anyway.
Right.
I still know many folks like that are in their early professional careers, or we'd go to conferences in the before times, and the idea of an open bar was a dream come true.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I'm always I don't feel comfortable with this. It's maybe in my early 20s, I would follow something that I learned when I would watch a lot of reality TV. Mm-hmm. So I used to watch The Millionaire Matchmaker. Okay. And Patty Stanger at all of her mixer events for her millionaires and whoever the prospective dates were a 2-drink limit no matter what. Because that way nobody was getting too impaired that they would say something completely regrettable or do something that can harm them. But it was just enough to maybe loosen you up if it made you feel comfortable. And I thought, okay, that seems like a good rule for life, whether it's a date or whether it's a networking event, because I thought you don't want to be sloppy, you don't want to be this. And of course, earlier in my career, I didn't know that I could just be brave enough to say no because I was scared of that judgment. Yeah. And I learned how to navigate that with or without that 2-drink limit. And I'm like, okay, now I don't have to drink at an event. And especially virtual events. I went to a wine tasting for a group of lawyers about a year ago. Uh-huh. And it was a virtual wine tasting. And they send you the box of wine. And I didn't want any of it because I just didn't feel comfortable. And I just sat there at this tasting and poured a glass of ginger ale into a wine glass just so they would leave me alone. And so I didn't feel excluded the whole time. Yeah.
And that's a really big word right there. You didn't feel excluded. And my friend Lynn just posted, I don't like to drink in public with others. Alcohol has never been her thing. It makes others feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I got to get my head up out of there above that frame, but it does. It makes people uncomfortable. The people who are drinking, it makes them uncomfortable, which is kind of weird at the same time.
Exactly. Is people have this feeling that they have to do it, or people just feel uncomfortable for whatever the reason, whether it's disability, whether it's moral, it's religious. Maybe they just found out they're pregnant and don't want to tell somebody. There's so many reasons, or you're in recovery. There's so many reasons folks might stay away. And there's other reasons that folks feel an immense pressure. So what if a supervisor is saying, oh, we're going to get a drink, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't, maybe they're not going to promote me or something like that. So there's so much pressure no matter where you're coming from. And that discomfort, I think, is very real for a lot of people. And I didn't realize just how real it was for more people than me until the reaction that I got from writing this. And I spoke to a colleague who's like, yeah, I almost got outed because I just found out I was pregnant 2 days before at an event. And I didn't have any alcohol at the event. And they knew me as this like party girl type person. And they all were calling me out of, why aren't you drinking? You usually live the life of the party. And this woman tells me, she's like, I just found out I was pregnant the 2 days before that event. And I didn't feel ready to tell the whole group that I was possibly expecting because I wanted to wait to tell the news. I didn't even get to tell my partner yet. And it was so uncomfortable. And I ended up having to say something, even though I didn't want to tell anyone.
Well, yeah. And if she's in her first trimester, you typically don't tell anybody until after the fact. And, if she hadn't told her partner yet, that's a whole nother thing too. Yeah. So
it's interesting to me, that whole dynamic.
Right. Exactly. Now, in the article you mentioned so that you have autism and, I think the 2 drink limit is really important too, but talk about the autism is a neurodiverse disease, right?
Yeah. So autism actually isn't a disease. It's just a developmental disability. No, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. This is a learning opportunity for everyone. So at least for me, why I don't drink with my autism is I already struggle enough with social cues. One of the big hallmarks of autism in particular is difficulties and differences in communication and social skills and things like that. So I will probably miss some fundamental social cue anyway. So I'm not good at reading people's body language or if they're making eye contact, because making eye contact for me feels very cumbersome and awkward. And then I'm focusing more on staring at you than what you're saying. And it doesn't usually go very well for everybody. So at least so for me, I'm like, okay, I don't need another excuse to miss a social cue or to act completely inappropriately, because chances are I'm fully capable of making a social faux pas all by myself. I don't need to be able to blame it on some external force. And I want to be in control of what I'm saying and doing. Like, I'm perfectly capable of embarrassing myself without alcohol, but I don't want to make it even worse.
Right.
Kind of how I see that. I know that sometimes it's a convenient excuse for folks, but for me, that's not how I like to operate. And I like being in control of the social situation. I don't want my judgment impaired. I know that women with disabilities have higher rates of harassment and things like that in all sorts of different contexts. And I'm like, I just want to stay safe. That's really important to me. But when we talk about neurodiversity, not just autism, I think it's really important that we understand who and what this exactly is. So when we talk about neurodiversity, at least here today, that it's this idea that we all have different brains. We kind of know that as a fact of life. So you and I don't think the same way. We don't process information that we could come into our environment with the same way. And the kind of premise of this is that's natural. It's to be expected, and it's something that should be respected. So you have people who are neurotypical, so to speak, who have your kind of standard ways of thinking and how they process information and cognition. And then you have folks who are neurodivergent, whose brains work outside of this expected norm. And people who are neurodivergent might be people with autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, mental health and psychiatric disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and even things that might be kind of acquired later in life, like if you have Alzheimer's or dementia or traumatic brain injury. So it's kind of a really big umbrella of people.
That is that. I mean, and if you think about it, neuro is brain. And so all of those things are, focused on the brain or about the brain and then the diversity of it. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And I think look at it as it's exactly that. It's brain diversity. It's not diversity of thought. It's just how our brains work.
Okay.
I think that's where people get kind of confused, is sometimes like, oh, diversity of thought, like politics. I'm like, no, it's just that our brains work differently. That's not bad.
Right. Yeah. That's not bad at all. And it's not necessarily, your opinions as well. It's just how you function, or maybe you've got dyslexia or something like that too. Okay. That makes complete sense.
I think for a lot of people who do have conditions like dyslexia, they find a sense of pride, because a lot of folks who do grow up with these things or find out later in life, there's kind of the sense of, oh my gosh, I'm different. Maybe I'm dumb. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I'm this. And I think having an answer, or at least a community, makes it so much better. And you realize that you're valid and you're not screwed up in some way.
Right. And unfortunately, a lot of us all think that we're screwed up in general. But when you have something, a condition or any, whatever, you can think even more so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. So society doesn't always make that easy.
No, it does not.
Around with these types of disabilities and conditions that can make you feel like you're not as deserving.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's unfortunate. So besides the alcohol, you also mentioned in the article, about eating. So why is eating seen as a challenge for people on the autism spectrum specifically?
Oh my gosh, this is probably one of my least favorite things to ever talk about, but I feel like it has to get talked about.
Okay.
A lot of us do either struggle with trying new things, we like routine or things to stay the same. And I know, at least for me, I never quite grew out of that quote unquote picky eater thing that we think kids grow out of this. But I know for autistic people like myself, it's very comforting to have the same things kind of presented the same way. So I will eat the same couple things that I ate when I was a kid. Okay. And I'm really afraid to try new things. And it's not because it's trying something new, but also there's different textures and smells and flavors and presentations. And I think that could be really anxiety inducing for a lot of folks who do rely on that routine. And I know there's also this concept in our community called same foods, which is the exact same thing with the exact same manufacturer. Because I know people who will even freak if you get them Cheetos and they're not Cheetos, or you get chips and they're not Lay's chips, for instance, but they might be Ruffles or something.
Right.
It's not the exact same thing. And that could be very scary for a lot of folks in this community. And I think that's really interesting to think about. I mean,
that is
think about how, I know this because I'm the same way. I won't buy another brand sometimes if they stop making the thing that you find really comforting. It can be kind of freaky to have to adjust to something brand new. So I eat a lot of the same things. And honestly, it's something that's very limiting in my life. And it's also something that I'm not ashamed of. But I know it makes a lot of situations really difficult because people never know where to go out to eat with me. Or I know in non-work situations, it can be frustrating. Oh, Haley only wants to go to Italian restaurants or somewhere that serves some form of chicken. Right. That we're not going to go be super adventurous and try this new Asian fusion place down the street because Haley's not going to eat anything. So I know for some people that's a huge point of frustration. And I know for me, I'm just go without me, or I just won't eat with you, but I'll still go with you. It's okay. I promise.
It reminds me of an article I read years ago, and there was a gentleman, I think he was coming from India, and he was having dinner at the White House, and it was in the middle of, he was fasting, and a huge media story about, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? He's putting his religious beliefs on this dinner at the White House, and because he's fasting, and he's like, I'm not, I'm just choosing. He was comfortable being at a table and not eating during the time frame of the dinner, but everyone else was uncomfortable about it.
Exactly. Other people interpret that as rude. And I think there kind of is this cultural competence component when we talk about food. And that doesn't just mean where you're from, but also how you experience the world. So I know for me, sometimes I'll be okay, what's something that I might eat that maybe it's not on the menu, or maybe it's something close, or what if I just don't want to say anything? What do I do? And I know sometimes it's really kind of scary. Right. I always look up menus before I even go somewhere because I need to already know and have a game plan.
Well, and that's also similar to somebody who's got food allergies too, right?
Exactly. Or if you're keeping kosher, or if you have any types of sensitivities or religious practices, or maybe you just don't like trying new things, that finding something that and having comfort, or maybe you're just anxious and need to practice ordering to a waiter because you just don't like talking to people, or talking to strangers in certain contexts can be difficult, or maybe you don't have the social cues, maybe you don't always have consistent language, or you use other forms of communication. Maybe I know a lot of folks in our community are also non-speaking. So maybe folks might use an iPad to communicate or something else. So it's even having that comfort of going, this is exactly what I'm going to order, and I feel better knowing this.
Okay, so how can an event planner and a caterer make it easier for you when you're going to an event?
Oh my gosh.
And going to a food and beverage function.
Okay. I think with beverages, of course, have options that aren't alcohol is always really nice. So and I think that even comes down to the staff. So it's even that making sure there's no pressure. Like if you don't want, you can still go to the bar and get a Diet Coke if you want. That's what I usually do. Or maybe there's like mocktails or something else or there's adult beverages that don't involve alcohol. I know that's a thing now. I'll get sent like certain products every once in a while now, or I'll be introduced to things that have maybe CBD in them or whatever. Like that's not my thing. But I know that the beverage industry in particular has gotten very creative over the last few years because that people don't want alcohol or they have different ways to think these things through. It's really interesting, at least to me. Yeah. But I think with caterers, I think that maybe if they're, even when you're going through it or you're signing up for an event, maybe even if you have any concerns, and usually when they say concerns, like it means, are you a vegetarian or are you keeping kosher? I think that there needs to be some other option. Like what if you have another concern? Or what if, or even I know for a lot of us, certain foods off of a kid's menu, for instance, can be really comforting. And of course, they'll put an age limit. Like I'm someone who would feel comfortable sometimes ordering from whatever's available to the 12 and under group because I'm like, okay, that's a lot of the same foods that I know and that I feel comfortable with. Right. And that I know exactly what I'm getting, but they're not going to let me order it because I'm 27. So I think that we need to get rid of some of those arbitrary limits on who can have what. Right. I know that sounds kind of strange. And I think that when we talk about kids menus, I understand why they're supposed to be for kids. I get that it's portions or whatnot, but I think that if you have folks who maybe are slightly older, like early teenagers or people with intellectual disabilities or people with disabilities who need that predictability or anything, I don't think that should be an argument with caterers or wait staff anywhere, really. I think that people should be able to have whatever they want. And if that's what they feel like enjoying, if they want the mac and cheese on the menu, right? Even if that's not what's primarily for everybody, but it's there for somebody, that should be available to everybody. I think that's probably not one of the most popular takes in the world, but that's kind of what I think would be super helpful sometimes. Right. No, I love that. So one of the things that I teach on when we're doing different menu planning and things is because the Americans with Disabilities Act was amended in 2008, and specifically some new terms were added to the list of major life activities, eating and all of our bodily functions, immune system. So I suggest when you're asking about, what kind of support can we provide you at the event? I say, click here if you have a, medically necessary diet. So you can get food allergies, diabetes, celiac, things like that. How would you would you click that button and say, I've got these needs? I would probably feel kind of intimidated, honestly. Okay. I think that those buttons, I think of it's for a very specific population. Okay. And I don't fit into that. So I don't have celiac. I don't have diabetes. So I'd probably be like, I don't feel like I should be infringing on something that's for a population that's not me. But if I realize that, but I might feel differently if I realize I have no other option. If it gave you the ability to get a customized meal, at an event, say the ABA conference, right? And you wanted a specific meal because the menu wasn't pre-planned or wasn't pre-promoted. Or I would maybe consider asking beforehand. I would probably have to think it through, or I'd just be like, I'm just packing a bunch of snacks with me and getting through this, and I'll get what I want afterwards. Okay. It really does depend, because I've gone to events where I'm like, okay, this is workable. And then I've gone to events where I'm like, all they're doing is serving steak. And if you're not a meat eater or you don't like steak, or you're like me, like this is kind of nerve-wracking to want to try, especially in a very public setting. So I actually get to talk to really interesting people. And I have a book coming out in November, and I got to talk to a psychologist who literally just helps autistic people try food and things like that. Things. Oh, she's so cool. I have to introduce you. Yeah. She was awesome. And she gave me all these interesting tips to try and introduce new foods to, like, for myself or for other autistic people. And a lot of the times when you try new things, you do it like very gradually and small and not like related to the meal. So you do it like in this no pressure situation, like, oh, you don't like it, you're not going to get what you want. Maybe try it after a meal or when it's like safe at home. And all you have to do is maybe try a bite, like these little like taste trials. And then if that doesn't work, then we could try again. And then you'll know, like, get your body used to this idea of trying something new.
Right.
And I thought it was super interesting when she was talking about this. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Shea, and she was out of the UK. She was wonderful to talk to. And I'm still a little nervous to try some of this stuff because trying new things is kind of anxiety inducing, but it's something that I've been meaning to work on for a number of years. And when I was a kid, it wasn't the number one thing. Number one for my family was to get me speaking and able to communicate and help me socialize and all this other stuff too. So getting past the food barriers is kind of lower on the ladder of things that were important. But I realize as I get older, it's something I really need to address.
Well, and
make a more concerted effort.
Right. Is there something on your list, top on your list that you want to try that you haven't?
I'm not sure. So I feel like I try something new that I get excited about every couple of years. So when I was a teenager, that big thing was pizza. Okay. I don't know why I never tried pizza. I think I was just very intimidated by it for some reason, but I think I tried it when I was like 12 or 13, and pizza is one of my favorite things in the world. So,
well, that's good.
And then of course, like whenever I'm asked like, oh, what advice would you give your younger self? It's like, eat pizza, try it. like go be a big girl. Like 7-year-old you should go be a big girl and not just go to the birthday parties because you want the cake. You should also try the pizza because that's like a meal of champions when you're 7.
Right. Oh yeah. Big time.
So I may not be champion level when you're older too.
Can I assume that pizza and Diet Coke are your favorite food and beverage?
That's a very good guess because I think you're right. I love a good pizza and I love a good diet. And I'm also one of those weirdos who thinks that Diet Coke out of like the fountain drink machines is better than when you buy the cans. So I get really excited about when I go out and I'm like, oh, there's fountain. I know they put extra syrup and stuff and it's like a little bit like fresher than when you get it out of a can, but it's just so good. So a funny story is I was the subject of a documentary a couple years ago and we would be done at the end of the day or we'd be on the road together and she'd be like, I'm going to go drive through McDonald's or something. Do you want anything? I'm like, yes, just a Diet Coke. I don't want any of the food, even though like because I just don't want it at like 10 o'clock at night because that's not me and that's not my schedule. I'm like, can I just get a Diet Coke? And she's like, don't you have those in your fridge? I'm like, yes, but it's fountain. So
hey, we like what we like.
So I have a strong opinion. I love all Diet Coke, but fountain Diet Coke is just like extra. Is that cherry on top?
Okay, so what do you wish people knew about what you do?
I think what I wish people knew is that my job, I think the way that I see what I do, so when I'm either consulting or I'm doing programming related to neurodiversity is that I do this because I care. It doesn't mean that I don't want to practice law. It doesn't mean any of that really. It means that this is stuff that, in conversations that we're having, and I don't want people to be intimidated. So I know when we do anything related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, people feel very intimidated by what they don't know. Right. And they're always afraid that they're going to get it wrong. So I always think it's okay. We have the capacity to learn and grow, so it's okay if we make mistakes. We all make mistakes. There are things that I'm still learning about my own community, let alone other communities. And we're just going to learn together. And that's not a bad thing. It makes it more welcoming. And I think that's something that I really value. And that's something people don't always know. And I wish that they knew that a lot of things are just having conversations and humanizing issues, that it's not trying to exactly tell you that you're wrong and scold you and say you've been acting very bad to a specific group of people. It's how can we learn from this experience? Like even just how we started our conversation today, we realized like, okay, maybe we might have not known about neurodiversity. Maybe we didn't know about the differences of how we talk about these things, but we're in this together. Learning is a huge gift and a privilege that we have. And it's really nice when we're able to just have a conversation about it.
So true. And when for me included, I mean, not knowing all the diverse aspects of neurodiversity, all the different conditions that fall under that is really important to understand, and how those can all be different, but also still be related in some way, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because even in our own community, there's a lot of what is or what isn't. And I know that some folks will use neurodiversity as just a synonym for autism. And I'm like, you're excluding so many people who identify with this or who realize this is not just us. Is that, yes, maybe that this was originally a very autistic-led initiative and movement, but it's so much broader because we're not the only ones whose brains work differently.
Oh, so hard. So I so agree with that. Now, recently and congratulations for this, you just got named to the Diversability's 2021 list of D30 disability impact list. And this is a global list of individuals who are doing work to, again, educate us on all the different diversity that there is in disability.
I'm completely humbled by that and honored by that. I'm just like, whoa.
Congratulations.
The plaque just came the other day. It's at my parents' house. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real.
That's so fun. And kudos, because I love the fact, and I was looking up Diversability, earlier today, but Diversability, there's so much diversity in disability.
Absolutely.
And we don't think about that.
No, I think we are still very stuck in that we see disability as just this wheelchair image.
Exactly.
And most people with disabilities aren't just wheelchair users or people with physical disabilities. It's a very big coalition of people. It's 1 in 4 people probably.
Wow.
So if you look at who the Americans with disabilities are under the ADA, it's about 1 in 4 people. So it might be someone who just has a health condition, a chronic illness, a physical or mobility disability, who might be blind or deaf, or they might have a learning disability, or they might have an intellectual or developmental disability like myself, that there's such a huge range of conditions that are covered.
Exactly. And there's so many different ways that somebody needs to approach, and just bringing it back to food and beverage, approaching food and beverage.
Just make everything accessible forever.
Right. Exactly. And I was telling someone the other day, if you cater to the minority, you can feed the majority.
It's so true.
And one guy was complaining to me a year ago. He's like, well, you're only talking about 1/3 of the community, of my event group. And I'm like, but the other 2/3 can eat everything on the menu. So why not plan around the 1/3 and everybody then can eat?
Exactly. Like, oh, if you even catered to that 1/3, I'm sure that everybody would be able to eat whatever the 1/3 is getting too, and that nobody feels excluded.
Right. Exactly.
I think that's how we have to do it, is when we do this kind of bottom up approach of help the person who's most impacted or most marginalized, it benefits everybody. So there's an interesting kind of concept of this with like the curb cut effect is what it's known as in disability. Like, how we have curb cuts on sidewalks.
Yeah.
They were originally made for people with wheelchairs and stuff to be able to cross the street. But of course we see parents with strollers, and we see people who are just clumsy, and everybody kind of benefits from this. And usually when I have to talk about this kind of bottom up innovation, I usually talk about captions, because a lot of people will watch TV with captions, even though they don't have a hearing impairment.
Right.
Self included. So I'm not deaf. I don't have a hearing impairment, but I like captions because they help me as someone who wants more visual information. And sometimes captions also include social cues in them. So I'll know if like a character is scoffing or if they're just chuckling, because sometimes the captions will tell you that.
Oh.
Give this extra context clue in there that I'm like, oh, that's what their face is doing. That makes sense. Because I'll be like, why are they laughing at an inappropriate time? And it's like a scoff and not a laugh.
Right.
Sometimes you can't always tell. And at the same time, I realize it's not just me or people with hearing impairments or who are deaf. It's also people who are learning a second language.
Right.
Who rely on those captions to understand what's going on TV. So a lot of different people benefit when we have accessibility. It's not an intended user.
Right. I love that. And even because I'm sometimes a smart aleck, right? And so I say something sarcastic, and somebody's might not get that cue, right?
Me.
All right. Well, I'll apologize in advance for that.
It's okay. I can sometimes pick it up, but if I miss it, it's not a slight at you.
Right. Nope. And I'm like, okay, maybe that came off the wrong way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about food and beverage, in your opinion, how can we be more inclusive of colleagues who don't drink alcohol or who, abstain from certain foods for whatever reason?
I think the first thing we can do is just be open-minded and not offer our judgment. So even when we don't go, oh, why aren't you doing this? And put that pressure for them to answer, feel like they have to act a certain way. I think that's a great first step. Mm-hmm. Or I think that pressure makes it so much worse. And I think about that especially with alcohol, because we really normalize it in certain situations. Is that when you have pressure, you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I just tell you my medical history? Do I tell you my reasons? Do I just say no and stand my ground and pray you don't ask again? Or do I just hope that the drinks are being served in red Solo cups and you're not going to assume otherwise? Like, right. It shouldn't be this complicated equation of thinking, how do I avoid this question? It's how do we realize that, one, everybody has different preferences and reasons. That's okay. And two, chances are it's none of your business why this person isn't doing something. That maybe they, like, I know that's weird, but it's like, it's not. And I think about this especially with folks who have chronic conditions. And I know drinking alcohol for them could be absolutely deadly, because mixing certain pain medications or anti-inflammatories with alcohol can be a recipe for disaster. Even with antidepressants, or if you're on like ADHD meds, like mixing those things together can be a potentially deadly combination. And I don't think I would want to tell a stranger. I mean, this isn't my experience, so I don't know. But if this was my experience, I'd be like, I don't know if I want to tell this stranger that I'm on X, Y, and Z, and that mixing it with a glass of wine could potentially land me in the hospital. I don't feel like that's a conversation you want to have at a professional event or with people you don't know, or you don't want to scare them and be like, oh God, I can't believe I said that. So I think it's, or you're thinking, why does the stranger need to know that I'm taking medication?
Right.
Well, I think it's a really strange thing to think about. So if we just kind of know to just not judge, everybody has their own story or reason, and maybe they don't want to tell it to us. And if they do, that's on their terms. Because some people might not want you to know that they're on medication. They might not want you to know, oh, I've been sober for 4 years. That people have different types of lifestyles. They have different experiences. And sometimes that's not always our place to know right away. And that might come with trust. So I think when people immediately put that pressure, it's like, are we doing forced vulnerability where somebody might not feel comfortable? And maybe you might not be comfortable if they give you that vulnerable answer. So I think of it as a very two-way street. Is avoiding judgment, I think, is probably one of the easiest things we could do. Just be like, you know what? That person's not hurting anybody. They're not doing anything wrong by having whatever they chose to drink or not drink or eat or not eat. Just make sure that they're safe and they're healthy. Like, I know sometimes people don't eat at events, or they overeat at events because they may have an eating disorder, or there might be something else going on too. And that maybe it's not our place to judge. I think it's just important that we know that our friends and our colleagues, if they feel like offering it, as long as they feel supported, they're safe, and they're as healthy as they could be, I think that we're in a good place.
I love that across the board. I mean, because, and I joke sometimes, like people with celiac disease or food allergies, we always like to talk about, poop and, what our bowels are going through or whatever, what it causes. Mm-hmm. But so having that conversation, even in a social environment, whether it's personal or business, I mean, it's still sometimes an uncomfortable conversation to have. And
exactly. Or it might not be a conversation you want to have unless it's with your close friends, your partner, or your family.
Right. Exactly. So, that's such great information. LA commented here that, planning for the lowest common denominator is exactly right. What we said a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And Angelique, she's in food service as a banquet captain and a server. And she's like, most people in the hotel industry have a passion for serving guests and accommodating their requests, which is great, Angelique. And I hope all the time that it happens. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen all the time. So
it doesn't, because I have brought many snacks to convention. And I didn't know that, because sometimes maybe the hotel staff isn't that involved in it, or the convention center staff isn't that involved. And it's just whatever the organization paid for in their budget, and that's where it ends. Mm-hmm. So I would be like, I'll just accommodate myself because I don't want to cause a scene. I don't want to make things harder on someone who already put so much into planning something. And I think that also comes down to this idea of internalized ableism, which is a whole other concept to unpack for people with disabilities, is that we're afraid that we might be a burden on other folks, or that things about our conditions that our stereotypes are true. So believing we're lazy or we're dumb, or that we're being a burden, or we're asking for too much. And I know that's something I struggle a lot with. I know a lot of folks struggle with this, but I'm always afraid that if I'm asking to have a certain need met or an accommodation, I'm sometimes afraid that I'm asking for too much, or that it's going to be a burden on the staff, or event planners or the hosts. I don't want to burden people.
Right.
So it's fine. I'll just do it myself. So I don't make them feel burdened. And then sometimes they don't feel right about it. And I'm like, I just didn't want to be a burden on you.
Well, and somebody just said fabulous conversation. So very relevant. So thank you very much. The, one of the things that I want to say is just to reiterate what we were talking about earlier today, you're not alone. So being on the being a meeting planner, and Angelique being on the catering side of it, it's really important that, because she said it right, we do want to accommodate. So meeting planners need to ask the questions of our attendees so that we can do that planning in advance. And because doing it at the last minute, not to
have their perspectives when you're planning.
Right. Exactly.
Because you might not think about these things unless someone comes to you. Because I know I've been to events where they didn't realize they had one deaf attendee and there was no sign language interpreter at the event. It's like, make sure, especially like in certain spaces where you are kind of focusing on marginalized populations, make sure you have those voices there. Right. Or you realize this demographic is definitely going to be represented at our event. How can we make sure that they don't feel like outsiders here?
Right.
So I felt really bad when I was at that event. It was for a disability related organization, which was even what made it more wild to me.
Right.
And they had one deaf attendee who was using ASL, and there was no interpreter, no cart captioning or live captioning. And I was like, wow. Oh my gosh, this was a huge oversight. And I wasn't on the planning board. I was one of the speakers. And I went to the planners. I'm like, how did you not have some kind of accessibility for speakers or something for this person? Mm-hmm. You had someone in your audience who couldn't take in everything that you were providing because you didn't think to ask, oh, do you need an accommodation? Or, oh, we should have that as the default because maybe if we had cart captioning, for instance, maybe not ASL. If this person requested ASL, we could have made that happen. But if we had cart, that could have benefited anyone who needs that visual of like live captioning. Like, oh my gosh. And I just felt I wasn't even one of the planners and I felt so terrible. But I realized if we had someone with a disability on that planning committee, maybe that would have came up sooner.
Right.
So I think make sure that you have diverse voices even when you're planning.
Well, and my friend Elisa told me a story. She's a wheelchair user, and a meeting planner called her and said, well, do you really need, she can stand up, not for long periods of time, but she's like, do you really need the ramp to get onto the stage? Can you just walk up? She's like, yeah, I need the ramp. Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I do not want to speak on behalf of another community, but I do know that being an ambulatory wheelchair user of any sort is really messy and really complicated for folks to wrap their head around. I think people really struggle with, oh, wait, you can walk or stand for a short period of time. Or like, oh, it's a miracle. It's like, maybe this person just has other conditions that they need a wheelchair most of the time, but sometimes they don't need it. And that's okay too. I'm like that. There's certain disability categories I think we're a lot better at dealing with than others. Right. I think it's when we don't understand the nuances where we really get lost. So ambulatory wheelchair users, people who seem like they have invisible disabilities because we can't conceptualize like what kind of pain they're in or what they're feeling or why they're feeling the way they do. But I think when it's something that we can apparently see, so most wheelchair users, if someone's blind or deaf or that they have a limb difference, like we could see that usually. It's pretty obvious to us. But when it's people who have less visible disability, we're not as good about it. Because we think, oh, do they really need that? Right. Exactly. Because they look a certain way. They look normal to us. Normal. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Exactly. Yeah. No, I don't think anything is normal. No, it's a setting on the dryer. You say that again? It's a setting on the washer dryer. It is. That's so true. I also learned it's a town in Illinois. So. Oh, really? Oh, okay. All right. Is everybody in that town normal? Who knows? The town name is normal. So I actually got to go there for work a couple of years ago. I thought it was kind of a fun fact. Yeah, definitely. So Diane said closed captions are necessary supports for those with visual and auditory processing disorders. And there's a lot of apps that are coming out that you can actually, Wordly is one of them, that you can actually get the closed captioning right to the phone of the person, of the people in the audience who need it, right? And there's a couple of other ones that are coming out that do that. So it's with live streams and stuff. So I know when I do Zoom events primarily, because I know, of course, with everything being virtual, we do a lot of Zoom, is I just tell them like, hey, consider installing like Otter AI. It's usually free if you've never used it, or if you only use it 3 times a month, it's free.
Right.
And most of the captions are pretty decent. They only get maybe a couple words here and there wrong, but usually they're good. And it's a very relatively inexpensive thing that makes things accessible for everybody.
Right.
I think we just are always afraid that accessibility costs money, and therefore it's not worth it. I think that's something that's very misunderstood and very wrong, is we think accommodating people is going to overblow our budget. It's too much effort, too much money. And it's like, no, especially when it benefits anybody.
Right, exactly. So if you plan it for the minority, the access points to the space, the food and beverage, and you plan for the minority, you're going to feed the majority or provide, a fabulous experience for everybody across the board.
I think so. It's really interesting because I think about things just even outside of food and beverage or outside of the captions that I've seen done really well at events. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this would benefit so many people. And I've seen some of those systems that we've used at events in disability spaces being used in non-disabled spaces. And I'm like, this is so interesting. Or they're interpreting it to mean something else. So I know at least the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, when they used to do in-person events, they had a little color-coded badge system. And like green meant that like I struggle socializing, but I want to meet new people.
Right.
Like, please consider approaching me, or maybe with an introduction only. And red meant I don't want to talk to new people, only people I know. And now I see other organizations that are using that kind of traffic light system in a sort. You can change them at any time because they're like little stickers or little color code badges. And I see them using them for if you feel comfortable interacting with people in person now.
Exactly.
Like I'm vaccinated and I want to be near you. I want to give hugs and kisses or whatever, or shake your hand. Yellow means I only want to shake your hand if you're vaccinated or I know you. And red means I don't care who you are. Please keep your social distance.
Right.
Like I've seen that being used. I'm like, wow, this is a great system.
Yeah.
And I know that you got this system because it originated with other populations. But it made it more accessible to people who might be immunocompromised or might be nervous about socializing with a group of 50 people again.
Okay, well, now I'm just going to throw another thing in there. But somebody who's colorblind, can they tell the difference?
I think it's because I'm thinking with red, green. I'm wondering how to do that, but
yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look.
Or what they might do is they might have them shaped. So one might be a triangle, one might be a circle, one might be a square, and so. The shapes if you're colorblind. At least that's how I would do it, is the shapes.
Yep.
But if you're, I don't know, let's just say if you're not colorblind, the colors. But if you're colorblind, the shapes will give it away. But I'm wondering how we do that also with blind populations. I know no system is perfect. Right. And I think that's really important when we talk about access needs and things, that nothing's perfect. But even just having something is a huge start.
Exactly. Well, and just thinking the stoplight, the red one could be the shape of a stop sign, because that's a universal shape across, globally pretty much. So, yeah. Well, Haley, I think I could talk to you for days.
I can too. This is super interesting and
very interesting.
As someone who's never really spent time in the event planning, I feel like I'm part of the events industry because I do a lot of conferences and speaking and trainings. So I feel like I'm involved a lot with the events industry on the speaker side, but I don't know how I'm not involved with planning. So knowing what goes on in planning has also been really enlightening for me.
Well, good. If you let me know, we can work on that together because there's so many different intricacies that go into planning events. And I think majority of event planners, even though we're so focused on getting it all done, we want to make sure that everything is completely inclusive. Well, as inclusive as possible for everyone attending. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So the more we know about a variety of different needs, the better off we are.
I think so too. And I think at the end of the day, no matter what side you are in that industry, you're really just trying to make a good experience or make people walk away with something that's memorable. So I know for me, I want people to feel empowered and maybe learn something. And you want people to be like, wow, that was a really well-run, beautifully done conference or event. And I'm thinking, I just want people to walk away with a good feeling about this. So I think that even that we want people to walk away feeling something, that what separates us isn't as large as what brings us together, I think. So no matter where you are in those industries.
I love that.
At least that's kind of where I'm thinking. Like we all just want people to walk away feeling something.
Exactly.
And we want them
not
to feel
angry. Yeah.
Exactly. We want them to feel something good. I want them to be empowered and feel like they learned something, and you want them to feel like, wow, I felt welcomed, I felt like I mattered, and I felt like this was somewhere that I enjoyed my time.
Exactly.
And I don't think those are very different goals at the end of the day.
I agree. So if somebody wanted to work with you, can they reach out to you?
You can say hello to me online. So I'm at haleymoss.com, .net, all that stuff. So I have all the domains that kind of circle back. And you can say hello to me on social media. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and I know we found each other through LinkedIn. So you can say hi to me there too. I'm everywhere. I'm pretty easy to find and get in touch with. And I really look forward to the conversations we get to keep having.
Likewise, Haley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening. And I was talking to Haley Moss, a neurodiversity expert, lawyer, and author of 4 books. Reach out to her if you want some more information about neurodivergent individuals and how to provide inclusive experiences. Until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.